I woke up on Christmas morning thinking I'd propose to her again with a better ring someday. And instead, she dumped me before I even finished my coffee. Let me back up because this story gets wild, and I mean really wild. But I need you to understand how I got to that moment sitting on my couch at 7 a.m. on December 25th, watching the woman I loved walk out the door with a suitcase, while our Christmas tree lights blinked behind her. My name's Dylan. I'm 35, and up until early December, my life was boring in the best possible way. I worked as an IT analyst in Spokane, Washington, pulling a decent salary, nothing crazy, but enough to feel secure. I'd been at the same company for 6 years, knew everyone's coffee order, had my own parking spot, the whole 9 yards. I was engaged to Kendra. We'd been together for 2 years, planning a spring wedding, talking about kids, arguing about whether we'd name our first daughter after her grandmother or mine. We'd already bought half the decorations for the reception, debated DJ versus live band so many times I could recite both arguments in my sleep. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, you know? Then the first week of December hit, and everything fell apart faster than I could process it. My company got acquired by some massive corporation out of Seattle, one of those deals where they send around an email at 9 a.m. and by noon, security's walking people out with boxes. 60% of the staff got cut, and I was part of that percentage. No warning, no performance review, just a 2-week severance package and a generic email thanking me for my service like I was some disposable part they'd upgraded. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, staring at that email on my phone, thinking about the mortgage, the wedding deposits, the ring payment I still owed. I drove home that day feeling like someone had punched a hole through my chest, but I wasn't going to give up. I started hustling immediately, picking up freelance gigs fixing servers, building basic websites for small businesses, doing network repairs for anyone who'd pay me. The money was inconsistent and way less than my salary, but it was something. I even sold my car because we could survive on Kendra's Honda, and I needed the cash cushion. I told myself this was temporary, that I'd find something better in January, that we'd laugh about this rough patch someday at our wedding reception. But Kendra changed, and it happened so fast I almost didn't catch it at first. The first few days after I lost my job, she said all the right things, told me it would be okay, that we'd figure it out together. But by the end of that first week, something shifted. The conversations about the wedding stopped. She'd come home late from work, later than she ever had before, and when I asked about her day, she'd give me one-word answers and go straight to the bedroom. She started going out with her friends more, hitting bars and clubs on weeknights, places she'd never cared about when I had a stable job. I'd text her goodnight, and she wouldn't respond until morning. We used to talk before bed every single night, even about stupid stuff like what we watched on TV or what we'd eat for breakfast, but suddenly there was just silence. I kept trying to make things normal, suggesting we watch a movie together, asking if she wanted to decorate the apartment for Christmas like we did last year. She'd just shrug and say maybe later, but later never came. By mid-December, I could feel her slipping away, but I didn't want to believe it. We'd been planning this life together for 2 years. We talked about growing old together, about the house we'd buy in 5 years, about teaching our kids to ride bikes. You don't just throw that away because someone loses a job, right? Wrong. A week before Christmas, I suggested we drive to my parents' place for the holidays like we always did. She looked at me like I'd asked her to fly to Mars and said, maybe another time? But then she mentioned she was planning to go to her parents' house, alone. That stung more than I wanted to admit, but I didn't push it. Every day that week, she got colder. She stopped kissing me goodbye in the morning, scrolled through her phone during dinner instead of talking, started sleeping on the far edge of the bed like I had some contagious disease. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once the holidays passed and I found a new job, we'd get back to normal. I even bought her a Christmas present back in November, before everything went to hell, this beautiful necklace she'd been eyeing for months. I wrapped it carefully, put it under our little tree, imagining her face when she opened it. Christmas morning came, and I woke up early, trying to make the day special despite everything. I made coffee, cooked eggs and bacon, set the table like we were going to have a normal holiday breakfast. I put on a Christmas playlist, turned on the tree lights, even lit one of those cinnamon candles she liked. The apartment looked festive and warm, but it felt hollow because I could sense what was coming. Kendra walked into the living room around 7:30, and the first thing I noticed was that she was already wearing her coat. Not pajamas, not the Christmas sweater I got her last year, just jeans and boots and her heavy winter coat like she was about to leave. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was blank in a way that made my stomach drop. She sat down across from me at the table, didn't touch the food, didn't even look at the present I'd put near her plate. She just stared at me for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, and then she said the words that gutted me completely. "I can't stay tied to someone with no future," she said, her voice flat and final like she'd been rehearsing this speech for days. "And I won't fake my happiness on Christmas." I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I was hearing. I slid the wrapped necklace across the table toward her, some pathetic part of me still hoping this was a bad dream or a test or something fixable. She didn't even touch it. She stood up, told me she was going to her parents alone, and that she'd come back for the rest of her stuff later. Then she walked out, and I heard her car start in the driveway. And just like that, Christmas was over. I sat at that table for an hour, staring at the eggs getting cold, listening to Mariah Carey sing about all she wants for Christmas, feeling like the biggest failure on the planet. The woman I'd planned to marry had just walked out on me on Christmas morning because I lost my job, because I wasn't good enough anymore, because I had no future. That phrase kept looping in my head like a curse. No future. No future. No future. The next few days were the worst of my life. Worse than getting fired. Worse than anything I'd experienced before. I barely slept, maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, and when I did, I'd wake up reaching for her side of the bed and finding it empty. I threw myself into work, taking any freelance gig I could find, coding at 2 in the morning just to keep my brain occupied so I wouldn't think about her. My apartment felt haunted. Every corner reminded me of something we'd done together, some plan we'd made. Then, 3 days after she left, I was up late working on a server migration project, exhausted and numb, when I saw a news alert pop up on my laptop. Someone in Washington state had won the Powerball jackpot, $9 million. I didn't think much of it at first, just another reminder that some people get lucky while others get dumped on Christmas. But then something clicked in my brain, this weird nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Back in mid-December, right after I sold my car, I'd stopped at a gas station to fill up Kendra's Honda before a grocery run. While I was inside paying, I grabbed a Powerball ticket on impulse, spent $2 I probably shouldn't have, picked random numbers without thinking twice. I'd stuffed the ticket in the kitchen junk drawer and completely forgotten about it because, honestly, who actually wins the lottery? But sitting there at 2 a.m. with that news alert glowing on my screen, I felt this insane urge to check. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer, dug past old batteries and spare keys and takeout menus, and found the crumpled ticket. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the winning numbers on my phone. I checked once, then twice, then a third time because my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. Every single number matched. All 6. I'd won $9 million, which after taxes would come out to about $4.8 million. I sat down on the kitchen floor in the dark, holding that ticket, and I didn't feel happy or excited or relieved. I felt empty. 1 week ago, Kendra had told me I had no future, and now I was a millionaire. The universe has a sick sense of humor. The first thing I did after confirming I'd won wasn't call anyone or celebrate or post about it online like an idiot. It was sit in silence and make a plan because I knew exactly what would happen if Kendra found out. She'd come running back with tears and apologies and some story about how she never stopped loving me, how she just needed space, how we could work through this together now that money wasn't an issue. I'd seen enough Reddit posts to know how this played out, and I wasn't about to become another cautionary tale about lottery winners who got destroyed by their exes. I spent that entire night researching, reading legal forums, figuring out how to protect myself, and by morning I had a name. Richard Volkman, an attorney in Seattle who specialized in lottery winnings and asset protection, the kind of lawyer who'd handled cases like mine a dozen times and knew every trick in the book. I called his office the day after New Year's, explained my situation, and he didn't even sound surprised. He told me we'd set up a trust to claim the money anonymously, that Washington state allowed winners to stay private if they were smart about it, and that I needed to cut every single financial tie to Kendra immediately. I followed his instructions exactly, closed our joint bank account, removed her access to my credit cards, changed passwords on everything from Netflix to my email, deleted all my social media accounts, got a new phone number, and only gave it to my parents and my brother, even rerouted my mail to a P.O. box. Richard processed the claim through the trust within 2 weeks, and suddenly I had $4.8 million sitting in accounts that didn't have my name directly attached to them. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, but I knew I had to make a bigger move if I wanted to stay hidden. Spokane was too small, too many mutual friends, too many places Kendra could track me down if she got desperate enough. I needed to disappear completely, start over somewhere she'd never think to look. I started researching small towns in Montana, places with mountains and lakes and communities that actually cared about privacy. I found Whitefish, a tiny town near Glacier National Park with maybe 7,000 people. I drove up there in February, spent a weekend looking at houses, and found this beautiful cabin-style place right on the edge of Whitefish Lake. 3 bedrooms, huge windows overlooking the water, surrounded by pine trees and snow. Asking price $400,000. I bought it in cash through an LLC, closed in 10 days, and moved in before Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was starting my new life on the most romantic holiday of the year, alone, but finally free. Living in Whitefish was different from anything I'd experienced before, quiet in a way that let me actually breathe for the first time in months. I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car or any of the flashy stuff lottery winners waste money on. I just lived simply, bought groceries at the local market, volunteered at the community center teaching basic computer skills to seniors. I started helping small businesses set up their networks for free, just to stay busy and feel useful, and people appreciated it without asking questions about where I came from or why I'd moved there. I made friends slowly, the kind of genuine friendships that form when nobody wants anything from you except your company. There was this guy Seth who ran fishing tours on the lake. We'd grab beers sometimes and talk about nothing important, and it felt good to just exist without the weight of my past crushing me. Then in early March, I went to this community potluck at the town hall, one of those events where everyone brings food and pretends to care about local politics, but really just wants to socialize. I brought store-bought cookies because I still couldn't cook worth a damn, and that's where I met Allison Carter. She was standing by the food table arranging her homemade chili in a crock pot, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a braid, and when she looked up and smiled at me, it wasn't the kind of smile that wanted something. It was just warm and genuine and kind. We started talking about how bad my cookies looked compared to everyone else's dishes, and she laughed in this easy way that made me feel normal for the first time since Christmas. We kept running into each other after that, at the coffee shop, at the library, on hiking trails around the lake. She worked as a nurse at the local clinic, had lived in Whitefish her whole life, loved the mountains and the quiet and the community. She didn't know anything about my lottery win or my past with Kendra, and I didn't tell her because it felt incredible to be seen as just Dylan, not Dylan the lottery winner or Dylan who got dumped on Christmas. We started spending more time together, nothing official at first, just friendship that slowly became something more. She'd text me pictures of sunrise over the lake. I'd bring her coffee before her early shifts, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like maybe I could build a real future with someone who actually valued me. But of course, the past doesn't stay buried forever, and Kendra made sure of that. The first message came right after New Year's, barely a week after she'd walked out on me. My old phone, the one I'd kept turned off in a drawer just in case, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dylan, I want to talk. Please," it said, and I knew immediately it was her. I didn't respond. Over the next 3 days, messages kept coming from different numbers, friends of hers I barely knew, mutual acquaintances asking me to just hear her out, saying she was sorry and needed closure. Then the calls started, voicemails that I deleted without listening to, texts that got more desperate each time. By mid-January, she'd somehow figured out I'd left Spokane because one of her friends mentioned seeing my apartment listed for rent online. The messages got more frantic after that, asking where I'd gone, if I was okay, saying she deserved to know what happened to me. I ignored every single one, blocked every number, and thought maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. In late February, I was working in my home office when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and my stomach dropped because there she was, Kendra, standing next to her Honda, looking exhausted and desperate after what must have been a 6-hour drive from Spokane. I have no idea how she found my address. Maybe she hired someone or stalked my parents or tracked down some mutual friend I'd forgotten about. But there she was on my property looking up at my house like she had any right to be there. I watched her through the window as she walked up to my front door, and I didn't move. She knocked, softly at first, then harder. I heard her voice through the door, muffled but clear enough. "I made a mistake," she called out, her voice cracking like she'd been crying the whole drive. "Please give me 5 minutes." I stood in my living room, 10 feet from that door, and I didn't say a word. I didn't open it, didn't yell at her to leave, didn't acknowledge her existence. I just walked into my kitchen, made myself a turkey sandwich, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and turned on the TV in my living room. I could still hear her outside, knocking, calling my name. saying she was scared to be alone, that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, that she still loved me. I sat on my couch, ate my sandwich, watched some documentary about deep-sea fishing, and let her stand there in the cold. After about 20 minutes, the knocking stopped. I heard her car start up, heard the tires crunch on the gravel driveway, and then silence. That moment, sitting there with my empty plate and my beer and my peace, that was my revenge. Not screaming at her, not telling her about the money, not giving her a single second of my time or energy. Just silence. Cold, absolute, perfect silence. Later that week, I got an email from Jennifer, one of Kendra's friends who I'd always thought was decent. The subject line said, "You should know," and inside was a short message explaining that Kendra had been telling everyone we were just on a break, that I'd disappeared because I was upset, that she had every right to talk to me about our relationship. But the kicker was the last line. Jennifer wrote that Kendra suspected I'd won money somehow, that she'd been obsessing over lottery records and asking mutual friends if I'd mentioned anything about a windfall. She was telling people she deserved a share of whatever I had because we'd been engaged, because she'd supported me emotionally, because the ticket was probably bought during our relationship. The entitlement was breathtaking, the audacity was almost impressive, and I forwarded that email to Richard immediately. He called me an hour later and said exactly what I needed to hear. "Ignore her," he told me, his voice matter-of-fact and reassuring. "She has no claim. You're 100% protected." So that's exactly what I did. I went back to my life in Whitefish, to my quiet mornings by the lake, to coffee dates with Allison, to volunteering and hiking and being happy. Kendra could tell whatever stories she wanted back in Spokane, could obsess over money she'd never touch, could spend her energy trying to track down a man who'd already moved on. I was done giving her space in my head. Spring came to Whitefish and brought with it something I hadn't felt in years. Actual peace that wasn't interrupted by anxiety or anger or the constant weight of wondering what went wrong. The snow melted off the lake. Wildflowers started popping up along the hiking trails, and I fell into a rhythm that felt sustainable and real. I'd wake up early, make coffee on my deck watching the sunrise, do freelance IT work I actually enjoyed because I wasn't desperate for every paycheck anymore. I still lived modestly, drove the same used truck I'd bought when I moved to Montana, wore jeans and flannels like everyone else in town. Nobody in Whitefish knew I had money, and that anonymity was worth more than any mansion or luxury car could ever be. I kept volunteering at the community center, teaching kids basic coding on Saturday mornings, helping elderly folks figure out their email accounts and video calls with their grandkids. Seth and I started going fishing twice a week, just floating on the lake talking about sports and weather and nothing that mattered, and those hours on the water became my therapy. Allison and I got closer too, not in some rushed, desperate way, but naturally, like two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and weren't trying to fix anything or prove anything. We'd cook dinner together at my place. She'd teach me how to actually season food properly, and I'd make her laugh when I inevitably burned something anyway. We'd drive up to Glacier National Park on her days off, hike for hours without talking much, just existing together in a way that felt easy and right. She still didn't know about the lottery win, and I hadn't told her yet. Not because I was hiding it exactly, but because our relationship wasn't built on that, and I wanted to keep it pure for as long as possible. Meanwhile, back in Spokane, Kendra's life was apparently falling apart in slow motion, and I only knew this because information has a way of traveling even when you're trying to stay hidden. My brother called me in April. We'd stayed in touch through my new number, and he mentioned he'd run into one of Kendra's cousins at a grocery store. The cousin had talked his ear off about how Kendra was struggling, how she'd become isolated after we broke up, how her friends were getting tired of hearing about her drama. Apparently, she'd been telling anyone who'd listened that I'd abandoned her, that I'd run off with money and refused to talk to her, that she deserved closure and I was being cruel by ignoring her. The story had evolved over the months from "we're on a break" to "he won the lottery and ghosted me" to "I have legal rights to his winnings," each version more desperate and entitled than the last. Some people believed her, most didn't, but either way her reputation had taken a hit. People remembered that she'd dumped me on Christmas morning, that she'd walked out when I was at my lowest, and now her crying about how I wouldn't give her a second chance just made her look shallow and opportunistic. My brother said the cousin seemed almost embarrassed talking about it, like the whole family knew Kendra had screwed up badly and was now facing the consequences. I listened to all this and felt nothing, not satisfaction or vindication or even pity, just indifference. She'd made her choice on December 25th when she put on her coat and told me I had no future, and now she was living with that choice. By summer, the messages had mostly stopped, just occasional texts from random numbers that I blocked immediately without reading. Richard called me in June to say that Kendra had apparently consulted with a lawyer about claiming part of my lottery winnings. But the lawyer had told her exactly what Richard had told me. She had zero legal standing because we weren't married. The ticket was purchased with my money before she left, and the trust was airtight. She could try to sue, but she'd lose and waste a bunch of money on legal fees in the process. So even her lawyer advised her to move on. That was the last I heard about any legal threats, and I assumed she'd finally accepted reality and given up. Meanwhile, my life in Whitefish kept getting better in small, meaningful ways. Allison and I made things official that summer. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation on my deck where we both acknowledged that this was real and we wanted to see where it went. I told her about the lottery win not long after that, sitting by the lake one evening, explaining the whole story from getting fired to Kendra leaving to finding that ticket to moving to Montana. She listened quietly, didn't interrupt, and when I finished she just nodded and said it explained some things but didn't change how she felt about me. That response meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. The fact that she'd fallen for me when she thought I was just some IT guy who'd moved to Montana for a fresh start, not because of what I had, but because of who I was. Fall rolled around and brought with it the kind of clarity that only comes with distance and time. I realized I hadn't thought about Kendra in weeks, that she'd become just a story I told sometimes, a chapter that was completely closed. I heard through the grapevine, my brother again, that she'd started dating someone new, some guy from her office, and I felt genuinely happy for her in an abstract way because it meant she'd finally moved on and stopped obsessing over what she'd lost. The holidays approached, and this time they didn't fill me with dread. Instead, I was actually looking forward to them. Allison and I planned a quiet Thanksgiving with Seth and some other friends, potluck style at my place, everyone bringing dishes and hanging out by the fireplace. Christmas was coming up too, and I'd already bought presents, was planning to visit my parents with Allison, was excited about decorating the house with someone who actually wanted to be there. 1 year ago, I'd been sitting at my kitchen table watching Kendra walk out the door, feeling like my life was over, like I'd never recover from that kind of rejection. Now I was living in a beautiful place with genuine friends and a woman who loved me for real, and none of it had anything to do with the money. The money had given me options and security and the ability to disappear when I needed to, but it hadn't bought me happiness. Happiness came from choosing to build something new instead of clinging to something broken, from recognizing that Kendra leaving was actually the best thing that could have happened because it forced me to become someone better. I think about that Christmas morning sometimes, about how she looked at me with contempt and said I had no future, about how certain she was that she was making the smart choice by leaving. I wonder if she thinks about it too, if she replays that moment and realizes she walked away from someone who would have spent his entire life making her happy, who would have shared everything with her, who loved her enough to keep trying even when she'd already given up. But mostly I don't wonder about her at all because I'm too busy living the future she said I didn't have. The truth is, the best revenge wasn't rubbing my lottery win in her face or posting about my new life on social media or even confronting her about how wrong she was. The best revenge was silence, was building a life so fulfilling and peaceful that she became irrelevant, was finding someone who saw my worth when I had nothing and chose to stay. Kendra left me because she thought I was a bad investment, because she couldn't see past a temporary setback to the person I actually was, and that says everything about her and nothing about me. She wanted a future that looked good on paper. I wanted a future that felt good in reality, and I got exactly what I wanted. So if you're reading this and you're going through something similar, if someone left you when you were down and now regrets it because your situation improved, remember this. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them explanations. You don't owe them anything. Build your new life in silence. Find people who value you consistently, and let your happiness be the only answer they ever get. That silence will haunt them way more than any words ever could, and you'll be too busy being happy to even notice. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments. Drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.